Welcome everyone to the second technical track. Our first speaker today is Dr. Parag Pruthi. Dr. Pruthi is the founder and CEO of NIKSUN, which he has built from a startup to a highly successful global company in the cybersecurity, wireless, and network monitoring markets. Dr. Pruthi, who received his doctorate in telecommunications from the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, advises on cyber defense strategies with some of the highest levels of government and enterprises around the world. Please welcome Dr. Pruthi.
The title of my talk today is Using Big Data Analytics to Thwart Cyber Threats. And I'll explain what I mean by that, and I'll also explain how having more intelligence can be very useful to respond in a very timely manner in this very disruptive environment we find ourselves in. Now, it was not a long time ago that we saw a number of high-profile denial-of-service attacks against a variety of banks. This was only about a year ago. The notable thing about this attack was that it continued on for several weeks, unabated. And the reason it continued on was that the attacker was using a variety of techniques and changing them on a continuous basis based on the response that was being met with by the different banks. So why am I bringing this up? Because this is an example of highly disruptive services for which I'm going to give you a case study at the end as to how big data can be used to mitigate these types of attacks in a highly rapid manner. Now, what are the other types of issues that we deal with, that we have to deal with out there in cybersecurity? According to the U.S. Secret Service Data Breach Information Report, 2013 report, hacking is accountable for about 52% of the breaches. So that's your essentially malicious attackers getting in somehow into your network. Malware, that means deploying of software that takes advantage of vulnerabilities in your environment, is about 40%. So these two are at the top of their list. The next weak point is physical. And that has to do mostly with credit cards and the skimming of credit cards and other devices like that. Social is about 29%, which means that attackers were able to pretend to be someone else and get information from either support centers by providing all kinds of probable information that led somebody to believe their identity and give them credentials to access certain systems. That's quite a high percentage, 29, 30%. And in fact, this will continue to rise because of things like Facebook and all of our private information being out there, which people can use to study you, study who you work with, all your social circles, and then assume your identity for that one moment when they can breach into systems by using some credentials somebody may provide them. As an example, if somebody ends up calling my office and saying they're me and I'm the CEO of the company, they're more likely to get a response from somebody to enable something. And if they were able to somehow talk socially in the manner that the new people I hung out with, then they can get better credibility established with whoever they're speaking to and get into secure systems. By the way, one way to ensure that you lock this down is to use some sort of biometric authentication mechanisms as well, and of course have strict policies not to allow somebody to change your credentials. Misuse was attributed at about 13%. So again, that would be somebody trying to do some mischief or just did not pay attention to what they were doing and left some back doors open in the system. 2% was errors. So they really made a mistake in some script somewhere and or a policy or a procedure. So I also looked at the growth of malware because you saw it was in the top two in the list. And you can see around the time 2007, an exponential growth in malware. This is from avtest.org's database, and they collect all new malware, and the number of new malware is reported here versus time. So it's an aggregate of new malware discovered in a period of time. Now, in my other talks, I give some basis for why that explodes in 2007, and I'll just leave it here to say that if you go back and look at when cyber war started to become prominent, it was 2007. So my hypothesis is that it is actually the nation states that have developed a lot of malware that has gone out and being used by a variety of individuals starting in 2007. But nonetheless, the point is that the exponential growth of malware, new malware, will ensure that there will be new vulnerabilities that we do not know about a priori, and we must actually not pretend that it's not going to happen to us. We must pretend that there will be a breach or there is a breach ongoing in our environment, and we must find it and quickly shut it down. So about a decade and a half ago, there was a lot of work on detection theory. And that detection theory essentially says that we're going to deploy tools that detect and flag bad stuff. Okay? Now, there was a paper by Axelson in 2000 in the ACM Transactional Security, which was entitled The Base Rate Fallacy of Intrusion Detection Systems. I suggest you read it because it gives a very scientific basis why detection theory really is not so powerful, and we see that out there with many of our clients, and the effectiveness of using just those types of techniques by themselves is not very high. In other words, the false positive rate tends to be very high, and that can lead to a lot of overhead in processing of the false positives, whereby you're not doing some real work in looking at the true positives. So I would say about 7, 8 years ago, and again, this is the hyper-exponential world we live in, we started to collect a lot of data, and in particular, event data. And so if we are able to collect indicators of threats from different parts of an environment, then we can create a database for all of the security data. And the SIM world has sort of become the de facto standard way of aggregating all of this data. And it does provide a much better effectiveness than just really having detection tools on their own, because you can cull out a lot of the false positives, as we heard earlier in the security presentation today. However, this is still not enough. And it's not enough because a number of places are still spending a lot of time trying to figure out exactly what happened, as was the case we saw in the DDoS attacks, which went on for over 6 weeks, unabated. Now, you probably are all aware of that. So I'm not going to go into those details, but 6 weeks is a long, long time for you to be under attack and not be able to just completely shut it off. So that's the kind of scenario we have to deal with. Now, all those banks had detection tools and SIM infrastructure to collect all of this information, but it did not provide them the real information they needed to pinpoint the method of attack and to shut it down in a rapid manner. So how can we go further than the state of the art today. So I'd like to first talk about the three domains of knowledge in which the human beings operate in. We have the known known. I know what I know. I can deal with that. Okay? So that's like maybe your antivirus tool. I know exactly this is a virus, it's a fingerprint, no problem. We'll find it, we'll catch it, we'll eliminate it. The next domain of intelligence is the known unknown. I know what I don't know. Okay? I consciously know what I don't know. I could deal with that. I know that somebody's going to hit me, on September 11th, and I'm prepared for it, and I've got everybody watching for it. I mean, something may happen tomorrow. There's a lot of people claiming they're going to do some cyber attacks tomorrow. Well, the fact that I know, and I know who's saying they're going to do it, allows me to prepare for them, and I can pretty much deal with that. Okay? The problem with the human mind is the unknown unknown. I don't know what I don't know. Okay? Let me repeat that one more time because it's kind of a hard concept to get your hands around that. I actually do not know what I do not know. Okay? So I'll give you an example of that. If you remember the I Love You virus and the Code Red and NIMDA, in those days, we did not think that routers had the IIS server code in it, and therefore the DSL modems and all would also be subjected to the Code Red and NIMDA. And so we got all blindsided, and there was a huge outage all over the place. It's that kind of stuff. It's not quite that, but it's that kind of stuff, which is I never anticipated, I never thought, I never knew. And that's the biggest problem in cybersecurity because somebody out there, your adversary, is actually trying to step ahead of you and make that unknown unknown into a known known for them. So the question becomes, how can you stay ahead of your adversary? Okay? So if I just remain with detection tools and the collection of these alarms and indicators, my adversary knows that as well, but they're not going to, if they're really serious, they're not going to use the simple techniques. They're going to come up with something new that you don't know yet. And the question is, we will be under attack, but how do we deal with that? Okay. So effectiveness will increase only if we can make more of the unknown known, because that's the domain where we have a blind spot. Okay? All right. Now, in the meantime, what's happening in the industry is that we see exponential growth in the 4 V's, which is the volume. The volume of stuff coming to us is exponentially increasing. At some of our clients, we're noticing as a result of mobile and cloud solutions that their traffic is doubling every 6 months, not just even 9 months. It's an incredible rate of change. The velocity is increasing tremendously because everybody wants video to their home now, and over your high-speed links on whether it be wired or wireless, you can pretty much get very high velocity of information. That means the velocity of attack rates can also increase substantially because people can leverage the same devices, the mobile devices and others, to launch cyber attacks. We did see that a couple of years ago where somebody used the low Earth, the LOIC tool to just fool everybody into clicking a link on Twitter, and that caused them to participate in a DDoS attack. Okay? The variety is also increasing exponentially because of the nature of the internet. Anybody can go out there and put a new service or a new application, and your threat vector may be from that application. The variability is huge. There's a lot of stuff going on at the same time. And so these are generally referred to as the vectors which comprise of the big data problem. But it's all around us. Now, how does that come into the cybersecurity paradigm? And how can we use the problem to help us? Put it in a different way. So we have increasing volume of data. And let me sort of give you a little background as to what I mean by the increasing volumes of data. Some of you may know that in 1997, I introduced this concept of packet capture. Capture every packet flowing by your network and put it on a box so that you could do what today would be easy to describe like a time machine. Something happened, you go back and you find out what happened. And that was the NetVCR. Now, I remember in 1998 when I took it to my first client on Wall Street was Morgan Stanley, and the NDAs are expired, and this is old news now. The lighthouse customer there was Gus Clisoris, Paul Toldalagi, Steve Rugenitz. Some of you in this industry may know of at least Steve, who was very much a powerhouse in the industry. And I went to him, and I had this 36 gigabyte box that just captured packets. And they thought, that was 36 gigabytes of packets. What are you going to do with that? It's like insane. And everybody said, what is the point of this thing? I don't need so much data. Well, obviously, they found it of use, and now all of Wall Street has this packet capture infrastructure projects, and they have it all over the place. But today, if you double the 36 gigabyte from 1998 to today, we're talking about a petabyte plus today in operations on a single box. And that's what our customers are using. Except that that is not just packet data, and that's where I want to do an industry shift again. It's actually the big data analytics that is going to help us because we cannot analyze so much packet data. Now, how can we scale to the volume? We have to create local data warehouses all over because we cannot move all this stuff. It's so huge to a central place. But we can use hierarchy to aggregate this data at different levels. And when we do that at the global command and control with all these different devices and traffic running by, we can then have at an instant information available about whatever it is that we happen to put into this data warehouse. Okay? And of course, what we want to put in there is the metadata of the transactions that may help us to identify a source of an attack, a method of attack, etc. But how do we handle such huge amounts of data? Well, we can use parallel processing and optimize this pipeline of processing the data. So how do we do that? And I'll explain in a second. The data is a time vector because we have information flow coming in all the time. So in this time vector, we want to produce partial results and have them available, and we want to update them. So it creates a new kind of science. How do you update them? Because it's not very simple as just adding stuff up. And then you have to aggregate all these results. So you have to do this with an architecture and a design. So we want to build micro analytic modules to produce atomic results, and then update them incrementally to produce molecular results, and then aggregate them to provide elemental results. And this engine is an analytic module. And combinations of these different engines become different analytic modules. And that's the library of parallel processing tools that is available to us. And that then becomes very useful in handling variety because we do not know what we're looking for in the unknown attacks that we initially never knew. Okay? So in other words, we have got to be processing all the data in its multiplicity of vectors and just keep it around in case we happen to need it, like IP addresses, of course, source ports, applications, geolocations, including some of the content hash indexed in terms of being able to look for where did this malware originate from and where did it end up in my network, for example. Then we want to use reconfigurable software, because the software, if it's reconfigurable, can handle variety. In other words, a priori, I do not know how I want to aggregate all of this information. So I have to be able to deploy reconfigurable software when I see a particular threat vector and I see something happening that I did not know before. So if you do that, you start to see effectiveness right spot on, because you have as much intelligence as can be gathered from the information that you collected. In other words, you've got everything. So in that petabyte of stuff that you collect at a node, half a petabyte may be this metadata stuff. Okay? It's no longer about just keeping raw data. It's pre-processed and it's available in real time. And that's the industry shift that needs to happen. Okay? In order to deal with this magnitude of attack vectors that we continue to see, and a large portion of it which is unknown. Okay. So case study, how do we use this? So let me give you one simple example of an advanced persistent threat. This is phishing and data leakage. And to keep it interesting, I'm going to show you that a phishing email has been received, somebody has been infected, and data leakage has happened. Then how do you find that? Obviously, if you know some of the patterns ahead of time, while you are processing the data, you can alarm on it and you can shut it down. But that becomes less interesting for this analysis. So let's look at a real unknown. We didn't know what type of method somebody would use. This is actually a little different version of an actual case study that we dealt with, whereby somebody gets an email that says your phone bill is $928.52. And I know that if I received that, I'm immediately tempted to go click one of these links and go, what's going on here? Now, being a security-minded professional, I probably wouldn't do that. I'd go just to the website directly and then log in that way. But we know that even after you have given courses to people not to click phishing emails, pretty much 66% of them will go back and click them. So we assume that somebody has clicked them, then we want to trace it back. So we have our dashboard, and the dashboard hasn't shown anything new because we didn't know about this kind of a malware and what it's doing. So we're going to go hunt for it. So we're going to say, show us emails around that time frame, and later we have found out that there was some certain breach in the system. And if we just kept only raw data, we would not be able to do this. Because what we want to do is to now say, of all the emails that I received, show me the one that has that particular text in it, because that looks like pretty unique and should not be in a lot of different emails. So if I then go into the system where I've kept all this metadata, and I then say, show me, and that's the big data, right? And show me emails that have that particular string in it, I start to get a list of all people that have actually received that email. Okay? Now that's very important, because I want to know that how many received it. Well, there were 53. That's not that bad. If 1,000 people received it, the percentage of infection will grow. So now I could immediately either just take those 53 guys off my network, assuming they've been infected, or maybe I can go hunt for who actually got infected. So let's do the next thing. So the next thing is, we're going to now say, okay, those are the malicious URLs. If somebody clicked those URLs, they accessed them, so why don't we ask the system who actually accessed them? So we're going to go back and do a search on, that's the actual bad link in that time. And we get to see that 3 people actually clicked them, a pretty good percentage, by the way, but 3 of them actually did get infected. So now we want to go and say, okay, show me everything this IP address did, and right after this download of this Trojan from that website. And we can then see, after a couple of other screens, that there is an upload over to Flickr. And the question is, no company would actually block Flickr, for example, because it's a photo sharing site. However, this Trojan has actually embedded stuff into images and sent it out. And so that's stuff that you'd never really find if you were using the known approach, because you wouldn't think of it earlier. Okay, so summary. Target is identified, and it took maybe 5 clicks, 10 clicks to do this. The zombie is identified, and the method of breach, we've discovered something new in terms of vulnerability. We can give it to our security team or give it to someone else who can analyze it for us. New malware has been identified, and the exfiltration has been identified, which is the most important thing. Okay? So again, if we did not have big data, it would take us a long time to figure this out looking at just log data or event data. And I think you can all understand that. The next case study, which is the final one that I want to talk about, is the DDoS type attacks. So client has been hit by DDoS attacks allegedly from Iran, as had been widely reported in the last quarter of last year. Several times a week, the bank experienced DOS attacks that brought down their network as well as their customer portal, quickly causing financial losses and damage to reputation. Obviously, the call centers are lighting up with complaints, and this is a situation none of you want to happen in your environment as well. Okay. Now, if we look at just sample indicators, we see that the gigabit internet-facing links, and this is just one of them, peak up at about 700 megabit plus, and if you zoom in, they go up all the way to gigabit. And so we do see indicators of DDoS, and there might be an alarm. The problem is they all had these indicators, but they couldn't figure out exactly what was the source of the attacks and how they were attacking them. So one of the other indicators we found is that there was an indicator that said HTTPS port is carrying non-HTTPS traffic, and there's a lot of curl traffic, and it was just an unknown, right? What's this, and why is it there? Had we not data mined this earlier, we would not be able to plot that if we had to go to raw data or we had to go to just event data, because it wouldn't be there. We did not know we needed that earlier, but it turned out to be useful in this particular case. So now we have that. Then we go and see the queries that are being launched, and you'll notice a strange 5-hex digit string being added here. And the adversary was so smart that they were rotating this randomly, and so you didn't know what to look for and what to block. However, after going to the big data warehouse, we put in a regular expression search for 5-digit hex string right after this, and we are able to quickly get information on, what are the domain names, what is the request method, the query string is coming distributed in this manner, source port, user agent, which is being changed by the adversary, TCP destination, source IP. I've removed that because those are where the attacker was coming from the various sites. In any case, long story short, we were able to identify within, I would say, minutes, do this complete analysis and block that for our customer. And that's the advantage and the power of the big data, which is not just the raw data, it's the pre-analyzed, pre-processed data that we did not think earlier would be useful for this problem that came in handy. Okay? And that's the only way to combat the unknown. Now contrast that with 6 weeks plus for a variety of other banks, right? So that's the difference. Now, with some of our law enforcement friends, we were able to trace it back to some places in Europe, and then we were able to find connections from there back to Iran. And you might have heard of some people talk about that, yes, we confirm this is coming from Iran. Okay. Some more analysis here, and I see that my time is pretty much up. But big data can significantly reduce response time, big data analytics. can provide actionable intelligence and provide accurate analytics for you. And it has been proven to thwart cyber threats. So I know I have probably no time left for Q&A, but I'll be in the back later if you want to ask me any questions. Thank you. I can take one or two questions? Okay. Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
So with regards to reconfigurability,
yeah.
You'd mentioned that reconfigurability allows you to sort of, dynamically change. Now, does that also affect how you store your data? For example, a lot of, junk comes in DDoS, right?
Yes.
It's not easily parsable because they're just intending to just send junk.
Yes.
So it doesn't come neatly in those fields that you're trying to process.
Correct.
Now, does your methodology include ability to detect those kind of changes in patterns and adapt to recording them that way? Or do you have a predefined input, output, or indexing, or KVI, or whatever, to do this?
Yeah. What we have is, actually today we have predefined the way that we index things, except that the hyperlinking of all of it is very super hyperlinked. In other words, all the tables and all the information get driven down from the raw packet data, and then they get aggregated. So therefore, we create a very huge index. And that index allows us to prune off nodes that are useless as we do a depth-first search, you see, for something. So we are getting there, but the solution for the reconfigurability has to be dependent on this kind of a data architecture in the first place. Yes, thank you. Any other question?
Hi. Is the product dependent upon an existing SIM database, or is it standalone, or is it a service-based solution?
It works in an ecosystem manner. The solution consists of obviously hardware and software to collect different types of data, raw data, SNMP data, NetFlow data, but coincidentally, the raw power of it comes from our own internal software called the Mercury engine, and we're sitting in the Mercury room. It's just coincidental. So this Mercury engine is what analyzes all of this in the multiplicity of ways, and then indicators are then forwarded to the SIM and other tools. So you could do further processing of that information and keep a nice ecosystem in place. So it's not a rip and replace. It just augments what you have with more pertinent information that could be useful for cybersecurity. Okay. Thank you.
I think we don't have time for any more questions, but you can find Dr. Pruthi and ask him later on. Let's thank him for the presentation.